The very first day, he started saying, do you know, we can't find any reference to this man named Muhammad in the 7th century. I said, what? Not one word about this man named Muhammad in the 7th century. There was no reference to this man named Muhammad. We can't find any reference to the city called Mecca. We can't find any manuscript for any book called the Qur'an. None of this we can find in the 7th century. But how do you prove evidence for something that never existed? Do you see the problem, folks? That was 1995. This is 2025, 30 years later. And everything I'm going to introduce tonight is based on evidence. We finally have the evidence. But here's what's fascinating. Everything's turned on its head. Because if we have the evidence, then what do they have? Absolutely.
For decades, the central figures and texts of Islam have stood largely unchallenged by direct historical evidence from their earliest period. Dr. J. Smith, a veteran in interfaith dialogue, spent years grappling with what he calls the silence, a striking absence of 7th century references to Muhammad, Mecca, and even the Qur'an itself. Imagine trying to prove something existed when history offered no direct trace. But after 30 years of relentless research and groundbreaking discoveries, the game has fundamentally changed. Dr. Smith is ready to reveal not just silence, but concrete evidence. This journey begins tonight, challenging everything you thought you knew.
And ever since, that's the last 44 years now, I have been working in Islam. 44 years of engaging with Muslims. The most beautiful people on earth, my favorite people, because they absolutely believe in everything that they say, unlike so many Christians. And they're willing to die for what they believe. Unfortunately, they're willing to take you with them. Nonetheless, it's not that they're doing it because they love it, it's because of that book, the Qur'an. This book right here. This is the one that does all the damage. But tonight, I'm not going to talk about this book. I did that a year and a half ago. We're not going to talk so much about this book. I'm going to talk about the man behind this book, the man that received this book, the man that supposedly from 610 to 632, that 22-year period, that received these two halves. If you just take the Quran in half, look, this is really damaged. Can you tell the Muslims have stolen it from me 5 times and the police have always gotten it back, and it is about ready to fall to pieces. But this is the book I've been using for year upon year. There on the ladder at Speaker's Corner every Sunday for 25 years, I use this book. And when you look at this book, you can't even tell the printing on the outside, but it goes this direction. So it goes Arabic, so it goes from the right to left. So that would be Medina, this would be Mecca. Medina means that's the part when Muhammad was living in Medina afterwards, and this is when he lived in Mecca, from 610 to 622. This is what he received first. So this is the first part of the Quran, though it's the second half that's written. Isn't that odd? Turn it upside down, you get the right sequence. Nonetheless, let's go back to that sequence. And this is the part that really there's not too much in this part that we would have problems with. Oh, there's lots of stories here that make no sense. But it's this half that has caused all the problems. This is where the violence is. This is where the misogyny is against women. Chapter 4. Chapter 2. This is the problem that we're all confronting. And I did that for 30, 40 years. I confronted this part. And I found out that the best place to do that was a place called Speaker's Corner. So I used to go down to Speaker's Corner. If you ever go to London, go to Speaker's Corner. It only exists on Sundays. And it's the place you need to go to because that's where you engage with Muslims face to face. It's the greatest laboratory in the world because you can say anything you want. I kid you not. It's the bastion of freedom of speech. It's been around for 200 years. It's where they used to execute all the prisoners every Sunday, and people would come because there was no television or radio back then. How did they get entertained? They would go and watch the executions on Sunday. And before the prisoners were executed, they were given their last defense, and they would get up on these little soapboxes, stand up on those soapboxes, and they would try to defend what they had done. Of course, it never worked. They still got executed, but the soapboxes remained. So when the executions were finished, the crowds were there, thousands of people, and people got up on those soapboxes and started preaching, or they started teaching, or they started yelling, or they started discussing and debating, and so it became Speaker's Corner. Now, today, we don't use soapboxes anymore, and that's where that term, get off your soapbox, it comes from Speaker's Corner. Now we use these little kitchen ladders that let you all have in your kitchen, these little A-frame ladders with 2 steps, just so your head's above the audience, so that you can be heard. That's why I feel very comfortable right now, because I'm above you, looking down on you. The problem is, the higher I go, the farther I fall. And so Speaker's Corner was very violent back in the 1990s. They had not yet become the religion of peace. That only happened after 9/11. They were still quite violent. And when they ran out of ideas, they used their fists. And it was not a pleasant place to be. But I would go down there every Sunday, and always I would try to engage with them. And we did what we call butt stomp by the seat of our pants, because there was nothing there to help us. There was no book written on how to engage face-to-face with Muslims and how to debate them and how to discuss them. Everything was attacking. When I got down there, they all had Bibles in their hands. Yes, Bibles, not Qur'ans. None of them had Qur'ans. They always had Bibles with little post-it notes all the way through. And all these post-it notes were about the historical anachronisms of our Bible, the internal contradictions. Did you know that we have all kinds of scientific errors in the Bible? Have you heard about this? I hadn't heard about this. I had 2 master's degrees, one in divinity and the other one in Islamics here at Fuller Seminary, and no one had taught me this. I hope Jack's teaching you all this. No, he's teaching you how to answer those kind of attacks. See, they were confronting my Bible, all these confrontations. And I remember the first Sunday I was down there, I was overwhelmed. I had no idea that I was going to get this kind of confrontation. And I wanted to get out of there. And I went home and I was bruised and battered, not physically, my ego was bruised, everything, because I thought I knew everything. And these guys ran circles around me. My wife saw how disgruntled I was, and so she kicked me out the door the next Sunday and made me go back down again. What a wife. If you met her, you'd see why. He says, get back on the horse again. If you're going to fall off the horse, just get back up and learn. Take a notebook with you and just learn and hear what their questions are and then find answers. Now, there was no internet back then in 1992, and there was no Google to ask your questions. You had to find out by going to the library or calling up somebody or trying to remember what you learned in seminary. I had nothing to help me. And I noticed that all the questions were coming one way, this way. They're always attacking my Lord. Always 2 subjects, Jesus and the Bible. Jesus in the Bible. Well, what 2 subjects do you want to talk about but those 2, right? What great subjects. And these were the Muslims that were asking me, see if you see an atheist or a humanist or anybody else want to talk to you about those 2 subjects. Only Muslims want to talk about those 2 subjects. And they should be our favorite subjects. Now, to defend against that, that's called apologetics. That's defense. And I had to learn my apologetics by the seat of my pants. It was difficult. I was hard. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. And then I went to and I did a course at the University of London by this man here, Dr. Gerald Hawting. He had a course there at School of Oriental and African Studies on the origins of Islam. Well, I said, well, I thought I knew everything. This would be a fun course to do. Let's see what he's talking about. And there was about 50 students in the class. And the very first day, he started saying, do you know, we can't find any reference to this man named Muhammad in the 7th century. I said, what? Not one word about this man named Muhammad in the 7th century. He said the earliest we can find about his biography is not till a man named Ibn Hisham. There it is, right there, Ibn Hisham. I just showed it to you, Ibn Hisham, right there. This is the first guy that ever wrote down his biography, and he died in 833. 833, Muhammad died in 632. Do you see a problem, folks? There it is right there. 833, when this guy finally writes it down. That's a 200-year gap. What happened? What happened in the intervening 200 years? And he says, you know, we can't find any mosque facing Mecca at all in the 7th century. I said, I've never been told this. Why didn't I learn that in seminary? Why didn't I learn that at Fuller? Why didn't I learn that from the Muslims who I was engaging with all these years? And he said, take a look at the Dome of the Rock. Probably the most famous building that's been built by a Muslim in the last 1,400 years. The most beautiful building is right there in Jerusalem. Notice it has no Qibla, direction of prayer. That's true, it has no Qibla. It should be facing Mecca, right? Every mosque or every religious building should be facing Mecca. This has no Qibla. I said, well, how come I've not heard this? And as he was putting out these curious little tidbits, half the class were made up of Muslim students. And they started getting up, going to the door, slamming the door, turning towards Dr. Hawting and saying not very pleasant things to him, and they never came back. Within 2 weeks, we lost all of our Muslims. 2 weeks, 25 Muslims had left. Now, if you're a professor on a university and you lose half your class, what are you going to do for your career? You cannot lose your students. And so he started toning down, and stopped coming to conclusion and stopped asking these questions. Well, I love these questions, and I saw the reaction of the students. And I said, wait a minute. If the Dome of the Rock has no Qibla, then what does that mean, Dr. Hotting? And he wouldn't answer. He didn't want to answer because he didn't want to lose any more students. So I start taking this down to Speaker's Corner. And I start putting it up there. And I got beat up. I mean, physically beat up. They knocked me out. And one time there were 60 Muslims around me, kicking me. I went unconscious. I had no idea what happened. When the police finally pulled me out, they said that a black man came and laid on top of me and took the blows for me. I said, where is he? He had disappeared. I call him Barry, my black angel. I have a black angel, Barry. He saved my life twice now at Speaker's Corner in the 25 years I've been there. But I suddenly realized this material is potent. This is heavy material. If this is the only reactions Muslims have, is to beat you up or to walk out the door and slam the door and yell at you as you're walking out, if that is the only reaction they have, we got to learn this material. We got to know this material. And that was then in 1995. Some of these students came to me and they said, we can't answer this, but there's a man who can. His name is Dr. Jamal Badawi. And they said, we want you to debate him. There it is, Dr. Jamal Badawi and myself. He is the world's leading authority on the Qur'an. He had done 300 videotapes. You know, these old boxes, these old VHSs. For those who had gray hair, remember the VHS boxes that we had to use? And he had done 300 of these videos just on the Qur'an. And they said, he's coming back from Malaysia. He's going to stop in London on his way back to Halifax in Canada. Would you be willing to debate him? Well, I hadn't done a debate before. We don't get trained up on how to do debates in seminary, not in homiletics class. We're trained just to say, make sure that you take a subject, only keep it to 20 minutes, say 3 things about that subject, make sure you support it in Scripture, and then always have a good conclusion at the end. And then as you walk out the door, people shake your hand and say, what a great sermon you've done. Nothing about debating, nothing about getting confronting or people supporting and people yelling at you and calling you all kinds of names, giving you death threats. That we weren't taught in homiletics. So I said, okay, let me try it out. And so I went up to see a woman her name was Dr. Patricia Qur'an. Dr. Patricia Qur'an is the leading authority on Mecca. She is from Denmark. She reads and writes 15 archaic languages. How many of you can read and write 15 archaic languages? Show of hands. None. She's unique in the world. And these are languages that no one uses anymore. Nabatean Aramaic, Syro-Aramaic, Akkadian. Amazing woman. She's a linguist. She studied there at the same school, School of Oriental and African Studies, got her doctorate there, and became head of department at Oxford University when I got to know her. And when I started my doctoral thesis, she was my supervisor. And she was the one that actually wrote 2 books, one called Hagerism and the other called Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam. She shut down Mecca. And all she did was look for source material from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, up until the 7th and 8th century, only using evidence from those centuries. Trying to find this city called Mecca. Could not find any reference to the city called Mecca at all. So I said, well, I'm going to use her. I went up to her, and of course, she knew me, and we went into. By this time, she had a death threat from Oxford University for writing Meccan Trade in 1997, and so she transferred up to Cambridge University, was head of department at that time, and I sat in her office for one afternoon for about 3 hours as we put together this debate. She said, do this, here's a better way to say it, here, why don't you use it? I finally turned to her, and I said, Dr. Qur'an, why aren't you doing this debate? This is your material. You have the languages. You're the one that's done the research. Me, what do I know? I'm just going to mimic you and copy you. And she turned to me and she started laughing. She said, Jay, let me tell you something. I have a chair to protect. I have an institution to represent. I could never do this debate. I don't have the freedom to do this debate as an academic. But you have no chair to protect. And the only person you represent, his name is Jesus Christ. What an answer. Here's an atheist telling me that we're the only ones that can do this debate. We have a freedom they don't have. As Christians, we have a freedom because of Jesus Christ that they do not have. So I said, okay, let's go. I did this debate. It took us 2 hours. At the end of the debate, I gave 10 historical challenges, all of them her challenges. He did not have an answer for any of them. And he turns to me at the end and he says, you know, Mr. Smith, all you've done is shown us everything you brought is based on silence. There's just nothing there. Granted, there's nothing there. Everything you've done is based on silence. And the absence of evidence does not prove the evidence of absence. And he hung me. The absence of evidence does not prove the evidence of absence. I had nowhere to go. He was right. I didn't have any evidence. He didn't have any evidence, so it's just silence. There was no reference to this man, Muhammad. We can't find any reference to the city called Mecca. We can't find any manuscript for any book called the Qur'an. None of this we can find in the 7th century. But that's just silence. Where's the evidence? How do you prove evidence for something that never existed? Do you see the problem, folks? That was 1995. This is 2025, 30 years later. And everything I'm going to introduce tonight is based on evidence. We finally have the evidence. But here's what's fascinating. Everything's turned on its head. Because if we have the evidence, then what do they have? Absolutely nothing. Now suddenly, everything the Muslims are going to present is based on silence. They have no evidence for their man Muhammad. Okay?
Tonight, you've heard the journey, a decades-long struggle with historical silence surrounding the origins of Islam. For years, skeptics rightly pointed out the glaring lack of 7th century evidence for figures like Muhammad, the city of Mecca, or even a complete Quranic manuscript. As Dr. Smith powerfully states, how do you prove evidence for something that never existed? This was the core challenge. The absence of evidence did not necessarily prove absence. But that was then. This is now. After 30 years of dedicated research, spurred by those very historical questions and the need for irrefutable proof, Dr. J. Smith is no longer dealing in silence. He has finally uncovered definitive, groundbreaking evidence. These aren't theories. These are tangible historical proofs that will fundamentally alter the discussion about Muhammad's existence and the very foundations of early Islam. This revelation is so significant, so impactful, that it turns the historical narrative on its head. This video is merely the prologue. In our upcoming series, we will delve deep into these unprecedented findings, presenting the 2 new, monumental pieces of evidence that have now emerged. Prepare to witness history rewritten,